Imagine a future in which human-controlled robots are responsible for building our cities. But due to the introduction of a virus in the system at the hands of a malicious party, humanity loses all control over them. These mechanical beings effectively go insane and start building and building and building, with no stop in sight. What was once a normal city expands to an unfathomable degree, quickly covering our entire planet and even branching outside of it. After tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years, this monstrous structure keeps growing outwards to the point that it ensnares the moon itself. And from there, the expansion never ceases, moving forth for millennia, devouring anything that it reaches, incalculably vast to the people still living in it, lost in its eternal corridors and staircases, the sky only a genetic memory. This is the world of Blam. Many of you are probably already familiar with Tsutomu Nihei's 1997 cult classic manga Blam. The action-packed sci-fi epic set inside of a virtually endless megastructure has only grown in popularity since its release almost 30 years ago, with even people like PewDiePie talking about it and garnering millions of views. This is due to many reasons. First and foremost, its absolutely unique art style, influenced by Nihei's experience working in construction and design, which gives life to beautifully detailed and stark industrial landscapes, with panels that have garnered quite the internet fame at this point. And also two characters that look like they've only got 2 brain cells left half of the time. Then there's obviously the complex and often enigmatic story, which doesn't really have much in the way of words, Nihei clearly preferring visual storytelling to exposition. Along with it come the various existential questions that it raises, about heavy stuff like genocidal conflict, human attachment, loneliness, powerlessness, and hopelessness. Though what keeps it so fascinating after all this time is probably not what it shows and tells the reader, but the opposite. The questions left unanswered, the spaces left unexplored. We could spend years trying to piece together a coherent explanation of and theorize on all that happens in Blam. And we might never reach a satisfying conclusion, just like the dwellers of the megastructure might never reach its limits. It's a mixture of all these aspects that makes Blam such a unique piece of art and gives it a very specific feeling. It manages to creep under your skin and stay with you in a way that I can't really compare to anything else except maybe Technolize, which I've already talked about in this video. But even that one is different enough that the comments that I've just made could be applied to it. And so this video is born both out of frustration and admiration. Frustration for the fact that no other piece of media can really scratch that Blam itch for me. And even when some come close, they often end up going in completely different directions. And admiration because this only makes me appreciate Nihei's original work that much more. So in this video, I'm going to focus on 3 games in particular that do it best in my opinion. And at least 1 or 2 of them are exactly the ones you'd expect. Many others that would also be considered inspired by Blam I've decided to leave out, but I'll tell you why later. Before that though, I want to tell you what makes Blam so interesting for me, because obviously this also influenced my game choice. First of all, for those that don't know, what is Blam even about? As I've said, it's set far into the future, in a gargantuan and ever-expanding megastructure created by the builders. These are robots that at one point, long ago, were under the control of the humans through the NetSphere. Basically a computer network accessible to people carrying a special gene, called the net terminal gene. Everything goes awry when a cult called The Order releases a mysterious infection which severs humanity's connection to the NetSphere by effectively deactivating the aforementioned gene. Although take this with a pinch of salt, because I'm not sure that it is actually stated that the infection was created by The Order, but they were surely all for it. With no control over them, the robots start mindlessly doing what they were programmed to do: build. And they keep doing it for millennia, expanding the city indefinitely. And if you're wondering how that's physically possible, seeing as they ran out of building materials at some point, well, from what I understand, they create matter from energy, so don't worry about it. It's sci-fi after all. Now, what I've just described is mainly shown in the short prequel manga to Blam, called Noise. The mainline story is actually set thousands, some speculate even hundreds of thousands of years later. It follows Killy, a skinny legend with a crazy powerful pistol, and his endless traversal of the megastructure with the objective of finding a human being with the net terminal gene in order to take back control of the net sphere. What makes this quest extremely difficult, not counting the vastness of the structure itself, is the presence of 2 main opposing forces: the Safeguards and the Silicon Life. The The former were basically a security system built to eliminate anyone trying to access the net sphere without the needed gene. And as you can imagine, once nobody carries the gene anymore, they pretty much become mindless extermination machines. The latter, the so-called Silicon Life, are a whole new species of beings which resulted from the experiments that the Order was carrying out to create the next evolution of humanity. They are fundamentally the antithesis to human life, to the compositional level, but they're really just trying to survive like the humans themselves. Killy's travels go something like this 9 out of 10 times. After years of wandering, he finds a tiny human colony. Turns out nobody there has the net terminal gene. Then, suddenly, either the safeguards or the Silicon Life or both show up and they start exterminating everyone. Killy fights back and oftentimes wins, but it's usually too late for the humans. Now, both safeguards and Silicon Life are extremely efficient killing machines, the latter capable of morphing their bodies into weapons prototype style. So how can our derp-eyed protagonist defeat them? Thanks to his absolutely f***off powerful gun, the gravitational beam emitter. Now, this might be one of the most OP weapons ever. Just to give you an idea of how ridiculous it is, many of the walls of the megastructure are very durable, sometimes said to be nigh indestructible. This is one of the reasons for which it's so hard to travel across the darn thing. Well, at one point Killy shoots his gun and they say that it made a 70-kilometer long hole in the structure. That's about 250,000 footballs, or 158 Empire State Buildings for you Americans. So yeah, pretty damn strong. Also, one of my favorite things about the whole manga is how most of the time, when Killy uses his pistol, the knockback makes him fly around like a ragdoll. So this is most of the context you'll need to know when it comes to the basics of Blam. Now let's talk about what makes it so fascinating. Obviously, the main thing that people usually mention outside of the art and the story is the megastructure itself. Its sheer size is beyond our comprehension, and this automatically fascinates us. We don't know how big it actually is, but we do get an idea when, in the prequel, the damn moon gets caught in it and built over. And there's also what has been dubbed the Jupiter Room by fans, a space which Killy reaches towards the end of the manga, when he comes out into an open room and sees darkness all around him. No walls or ceiling in sight. Here he encounters a silicon life form who tells him that the room is spherical and its diameter is 143,000 kilometers, which is the size of Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system. And this is just a small part of the megastructure. Yeah, let that sink in. There's something intrinsically captivating about things far beyond our own size, whether it be a huge building, a mountain, the depth of the ocean, or the cosmos. The feeling of being so small by comparison is striking, and when it gets to this level, it pretty much never stops baffling us. That's why, even though we already know that the megastructure is absolutely huge, the moment we get to the Jupiter Room and we finally have a point of comparison is just jaw-dropping. For me though, it's never been about the size itself, but more so about how the size stretches time. So a journey like the one that Killy undertakes would obviously take a long-ass time, thousands of years, some speculate even tens or hundreds of thousands of years. And we can't really wrap our head around such a time frame. Our own recorded history is only about 6,000 years old, and even then, modernity and our own lives are but a tiny blip by comparison. And Nihei really likes to play with time quite unexpectedly. There is one moment in which the main characters get on an elevator and it takes them an entire month to get to the top. At one point they get separated and just a few panels later they meet up, and Chibo, who we could call the co-protagonist, tells Killy that she waited for him for 10 years. Although in that chapter there's also some weirdness going on with time and universal planes, so I'm not sure if it counts. Then there's also the time that Killy gets incapacitated in battle and has to basically rebuild himself. This process takes him something like 14 years, and then he just keeps on going. Another famous panel is the one where we see what is probably a flashback of two new characters, Domuchevsky and Iko, fighting the silicon life forms. And when our protagonists meet them in present time, Nihei just drops a 2,244,096 hours later, like it was nothing. That's 256 years, and these two have basically been battling the same hostiles all this time. When it comes to Killy himself, from what I read online, Nihei confirmed that he's more than 3,000 years old, and that given his long existence, he ends up forgetting most things that happened in the past except his mission directive. But this crazy passage of time is not only applicable to the protagonist. In fact, what I find most interesting is how it applies to the general population of the megastructure. As I've said before, every so often we meet some remnants of human civilization. But given how vast the structure and timeline are, these are small populations that haven't had any contact with other humans in ages. And And this concept in itself is insane to me. The people we meet are all different sizes, having literally evolved differently from each other in all this time. They have their own cultures, their own mythologies, they have a different understanding of the world they inhabit. All of these small pockets of civilization have their own histories happening parallel to and detached from each other. And that is just mind-blowing. This also just serves once more the purpose of showing us how absolutely desolate most of the structure is, even though some human life still manages to endure under such harsh circumstances. It could take years for Killy to travel these endless corridors, stairways and halls before finding any sign of human life. But he does manage to find it, which brings me to another mind-blowing idea. It is speculated by some that given how the story takes place in such a far-off future and that the megastructure is so infinitely vast, the simple fact that Killy even manages to find human beings at all could actually be a sign that the total amount of people living across the structure is ridiculously high, in the order of trillions or more. Again, this is just speculation and it is never stated, but it does make sense if you think about it. If Killy can come across different human outposts in a space that is bigger than the solar system itself, it means that there must be a lot of humans there. Because even our seemingly huge current population of 8 billion would be like a tiny needle in a gargantuan haystack in comparison. And so this, at least for me, has to be one of the main things that a piece of media has to do in order to scratch that blam itch that I have. The vastness of time. Beyond just the vastness of the physical structure itself, there need to be elements that make us feel insignificant in this sense too. Like we're just a tiny element of something unfathomably older and bigger than us. And that our story is not the only one happening at this time. There need to be at least some remnants of life to put that desolation into perspective. To give you one last salient example of this, there is this moment in the manga where the already mentioned Domachevsky puts down an object, which by all accounts seemed like an ordinary pen cap. When asked what it is, he says, "I picked it up somewhere else, just an old part or something." This is a small moment, but shows us just how detached these characters are from our own world. They can interface with robots and artificial intelligences, they have futuristic guns and all that, but they have no idea of what a pen is, treating a simple cap as if it were some sort of relic. This might be one of my favorite moments in the whole manga. Something else that I found really engrossing about Blam is that for how gloomy, depressing and cruel it is, it's also very fun. It's genuinely a blast to get through. It's full of action, the exploration of the world is always engaging, and really it's not one of those heavy pieces of media, you know? It's not like Technolize in this sense. When I look at this huge and densely packed world of stairs, platforms, pipes and whatever else, I'm automatically reminded of the way I used to see those kitty jungles as a child. In fact, there used to be a sort of play place for children here, which had a huge kitty jungle, or at least that's how I remember it, which was also poorly illuminated. Something like this. I mean, is that not a megastructure for kids? It's this sort of free traversal of different types of surfaces with many branching paths that seems ever present. It feels to me like the world of Blam is a giant kitty jungle made of concrete and steel, with endless possibilities of pathfinding, in which you always need to think about your movement in order to get somewhere. Constantly engaged in this sense. Well, except when you need to walk across a room the size of Jupiter, but you know what I mean. Add all of this to the real meat of the action, the crazy fights with cyborgs and robots that Killy disposes of with his ridiculous gun that puts giant holes in anything it touches, and you got something that by all logic should be really fun and dynamic. So this is why, when it comes to games, something like a walking simulator, as much as I love the genre, wouldn't really fit Blam in my opinion. There needs to be some thought and attention put into traversal, and into action of some kind. Which doesn't mean that it has to be all shooty, though that would be cool, but it should engage you in a way that is fun. That's also mainly why something like Technolize, while having some strong Blam elements, still feels very different to me. It's extremely languid pace, and the action usually happening out of frame, or otherwise not being the focus, don't really reflect the roller coaster that is the manga. And the last element I quickly want to mention is relative to how the story itself is told. As I've said before, Blam is not much for narration, and though we do get some exposition, it often ends up raising even more questions. We constantly feel like we're somewhat outside of the narrative, like we're just external observers of the action. We can barely even get attached to the characters, seeing how little dialogue there is, especially from our protagonist. We can, at best, empathize with their arduous journey. There's something almost clinical about the way the manga is presented. The stony coldness of the space reflects the story itself. All of this, I think, contributes to transforming the narrative into a puzzle, but one that doesn't really want you to solve it. It feels at times as if Nihei takes pleasure in being so laconic, but I don't think that it's just to confuse the reader. This approach feels to me like a way to give an almost mythological feel to the whole series, to make it read as if it was an old ancient text that was found full of holes, eroded by time, with whole pages and chapters missing. This is something I've talked about a bunch of my Games from the Abyss video, especially when referring to Abyssal Somewhere, which, by the way, has a lot of Blam vibes and gets a lot of things right, so to speak, but really goes in its own direction. So, to try and scratch that itch, this is also something that I feel a piece of media should do. Propose a non-conventional narrative. It needs to be somewhat fragmented, and not too eager to reveal much in the way of information. Now, this would also be a good place to mention the fact that any piece of media I've already talked about in relation to Blam, or the games that I'll show later, did not set out to be an imitation of Blam. So if I say stuff like they get this right or that right, it doesn't mean that they do anything else in the wrong way, so to speak, you know? This is just my own personal search for Blam-like elements in other pieces of media. These are their own projects with their own individual authors, with their own individual stories. They don't have to do anything. Their similarity to Blam or lack thereof is not in any way an indication of their quality. A piece of art has to be judged on its own merits, not in relation to its inspirations. Now let's get into the first pick. So this first one might be the only unexpected pick out of all, just because I don't think that many people know about it. It has only about 420 reviews on Steam, and that is an absolute shame, because out of all of these, if there's one game I absolutely want a follow-up of, it is Metal Garden. It sits somewhere at the intersection of Halo, Blam, and just general 6th generation console jank. It is obviously a small budget project and definitely has some issues, but I had a total blast playing through its criminally short runtime. Metal Garden was developed by Timerasoft and came out just 2 months ago. Let's read its Steam page description for a moment. A nomad wanders the far reaches of an overgrown megastructure. A world built for a forgotten purpose in which countless civilizations have lived entombed for ages. But when the mech they use to traverse its vast distances breaks, they remain stranded in its hostile wilds beneath a concrete sky. So we have a nomad who wanders, an overgrown megastructure whose purpose has been lost in time, and it has housed thousands of civilizations. Yeah, you can already smell Blam all over this thing. We start out sitting on a chair and smoking a ciggy. And immediately we're hit with that scale. The whole time we'll be playing in a pretty big and open part of the megastructure, but whenever we look up, we can see how gigantic the rest of it is, covering the whole sky. And that's already a 10 out of 10 for atmosphere from me. The place is so huge that stormy clouds have formed, through which we can see an endless industrial ceiling, leading to who knows how many other places similar to this one. I'll say outright that most of the game is spent in big and open areas, so that cramped kitty jungle feeling that I love in Blam is not really there most of the time. Also, as the description mentions, the map is overgrown and there's lots of nature, of which we see almost none in Blam. And while it is somewhat a departure, I still love the idea, and it works quite well for the atmosphere. The skybox is always there anyway, and it is quite efficient at giving us some sense of oppression throughout the whole playthrough. All of this is stated also at the very start of the game, which adds that the path outside of the structure has so far never been found, and that many states and corporations are at war in the megastructure. And so we start as the nameless nomad. Once we get up, we see that our mech can't be repaired, so we'll have to go on foot. Among the things we can grab, there's our little knife with a stiff and funny melee attack animation, a pistol and some thrust boots, which allow us to double jump. So again, automatic 10 out of 10. What you'll notice immediately is that the movement is quite reminiscent of Halo. It's very floaty, but not in a bad way, and it just makes the double jump even more fun to use. To our back we find a small canyon, and in here we meet our first enemies. What you'll soon realize is that their aim is pretty broken, in the sense that it's ridiculously good even from far away. Sure, once you get the hang of it, you'll understand that, especially from a distance, the bullets are relatively slow, so double jumping like a madman will probably be your go-to strategy in most encounters. The gunplay itself is also fun. The only problem is that the weapons feel like toys, with weak visual feedback and very quiet sound design. In this sense, it reminded me of New Vegas more than Halo, but it's fine. There's also a limb damage system that leads to your character getting some sort of a handicap. For example, if you damage your leg, your sprint becomes slower, and if you damage your shoulder, your aim becomes worse, which again reminded me a bit of Fallout. The whole game will mostly be about traversing new areas, dispatching the enemies, solving some kind of light environmental puzzle, and going to the next area. I know that it might not sound too exciting to put this way, but there's a lot of little things that the game does to be more engaging. For example, on your first run, you might be a bit confused on where to go, seeing as there are a bunch of branching paths, which I appreciated, because it gives you the feeling of having at least some freedom of choice. And to be sure, there is some emphasis on exploration. Don't expect anything crazy, of course, it's a small project, but it's the right amount to make it feel satisfying. You can go out of your way to find stuff like medpacks, grenades, ammo, and hidden keys to other optional rooms. I don't want to say too much about it because with its short runtime it would be way too easy to spoil, but I do want to comment on a few things that I found particularly cool. Like the fact that you come to this place in the middle of a conflict between other factions and nothing hints to the fact that you're supposed to be a part of it. So here's already that feeling that I've talked about in relation to Blam, the feeling of the reader being an external observer. It seems like in this case it's these pirate-looking sellswords against these big tiger-headed boys. You even find the wounded king of the tiger heads, and you can choose to provide him with some medical care while he recounts what happened, giving you more lore tidbits. What makes it a bit confusing is the fact that afterwards the tiger-headed guys will also be an enemy type, fighting alongside the sellswords. And there's really only 3 enemy types with 2 skins, which is a bit underwhelming. You've got the normal sellswords with their pistols, the same guys but with sniper rifles, and the tiger heads with melee weapons. But something else that this game does really well in my opinion is related to storytelling and the passage of time. You can find files scattered around or even listen in on the enemies' conversations to learn more about whatever is going on here. And what you'll find out is that this is definitely more than a simple turf war. In many of these tidbits, the vastness of the timeline becomes clear. Especially at one point when you turn on a computer and it says that its current working hour is 27,342,549,243, which is 3,121,295 years, pretty much. And this reminded me a lot of that Blam panel after Domachevsky's flashback. One of these pieces of information is even hidden in a dead mercenary's external brain, which you can connect to and read, just like Killy does in the manga with his hip connectors. So I don't want to tell you what the objective is or what you'll find at the end of it, or even what the lore of this particular area is, because I want you to experience it for yourself. For $5 it's very much worth it, and the game just came out, so I'd love it if you could show the devs some support. I'd really love to see more of Metal Garden, and I'm really curious of where it could go, both with its story and its environments. Overall, Metal Garden is super fun, and it shares a lot of elements with Blam. The megastructure, the action, the crazy time frames, the laconic narrative, the different civilizations with their own stories, and in general it just wears that influence on its sleeve. Where it really differs from Nihei's manga is mainly the map itself, which does have some similar aesthetics sometimes, but it definitely takes after Halo with its big sandbox type maps rather than the cramped hallways of Blam. So yeah, there is a masterpiece waiting to happen here if you ask me. Thank you to user Yad for mentioning it under one of my posts. This is the game that any fan of Blam was expecting to see on this list. Once again, I have to mention that Jacob Geller beat me to it by 6 years, so if you want a good analysis of the game that's much deeper than mine, then go check out his video. NaissanceE is a 2014 indie game developed by Limas 5, and it's become kind of a cult classic at this point. In it, you have an unspecified goal, and you just traverse a, you guessed it, megastructure. It sits somewhere between a platformer, a puzzle game, and a walking simulator. In any case, it's definitely quite unique. The only things you can really do are move and jump around and breathe. Yeah, that's one of the main mechanics. If you sprint, you see this white circle appear and you need to click the left mouse button to make your character take a breath. I can't help but think that they didn't know what mechanic to add to the game and just went with this to try and make the game more engaging. It's not particularly fun per se, more so annoying most of the time. But where NaissanceE really shines is not really its mechanics. Instead, it is the fascinating world that it allows us to explore. After starting the game, we're soon met with tons of hallways, stairways, rooms, some pretty obviously designed for human living, and what you'll probably feel soon while playing is a bit of vertigo. Not just because of the huge drop-offs and the verticality of the levels, but because of how many different paths you can take. You don't have an objective pointer, you don't know which rooms you'll need to traverse or what the best path forward is, you just have to wing it. Unfortunately, this is true only for a very limited portion of the game, especially near the beginning. But in that part, NaissanceE really captured that feeling of wandering through a megastructure better than anything I've ever seen. I was honestly giddy while playing because of how surprising this was. You feel alone and lost, like you're just wandering through the empty ruins of a long-gone civilization. And you're even detached from your own character, because you have no idea of who they really are or why they are undertaking this journey. The feeling of mystery in this game is immediately established. And I mean, just look at these vast, sprawling environments. The Blam influence is very palpable. You see all of these small lights coming out of the windows in the distance, and you can't help but wonder if anybody's still living here. Seeing also how minimalistic the game is in the way of storytelling, with no dialogues and no exposition, it also manages to capture that puzzle-like feeling that the manga has. The only real clues we have as to what is going on are the names of the levels, and even then they're quite vague. So the whole game will be spent pretty much just trying to get through these spaces, jumping and crawling around, and trying to solve some small puzzles to progress. When it comes to the puzzles, I'll give them the fact that they're unique enough, though I never found them particularly interesting. The problems arise when we talk about the platforming, because the movement in NaissanceE doesn't feel very good. Don't get me wrong, it's not awful, it's serviceable enough when you explore around the citadel, but when you start having to complete obstacle courses in which you need to time your jumps and be precise with where you land, well, it just becomes frustrating. What I personally felt was that the jump seems a bit delayed, just the right amount to make it impossible to time it well in half of the platforming sections. And this wouldn't be too bad if the whole game was spent in areas like these, where you just need to plan out your route a little bit and you'll be fine. But for some unexplainable reason, they decided to put that whole air vent section where it's just a whole bunch of really annoying platforming sections in an area that looks very boring. This whole part almost made me drop the game. I'm generally not a huge fan of platformers, but the problem here is that it's just not fun if you ask me. The movement in the game doesn't feel particularly good, the breathing mechanic is annoying, and the platforms themselves are just n'importe quoi. I just don't understand why one has all of these beautiful and sprawling landscapes and decide to put you inside of giant anonymous looking pipes for a whole chunk of the game. Well, one theory would be that they just wanted to pad out the game, which is also foreshadowing for the last entry in this list, but more on that later. Anyway, besides this really annoying part, the rest of the game is quite beautiful, and I loved how disoriented it made me feel at times. I never knew what to expect, and it often felt much bigger than it actually was. Like in this Citadel section, for example, there is actually a point you need to reach, and when replaying you'll realize that it's not as open-ended as it seems, but still, the first impression is extremely effective in giving you that sense of being lost in a gigantic megastructure, and it captures some of Blam's charm very well. I also love the part with the sand dunes, where you reach a huge open area covered in sand, which contains strange ruins of all kinds that can start dancing and playing music. If you look up, you see another section of the structure, and it's absolutely massive. The use of color here is also really beautiful. After all you've been through, this is almost calming. I also have to mention that the soundtrack for the whole game is fantastic, but especially in the dunes. From what I understand, it's not an original soundtrack, but it was a mishmash of different artists' songs, and it works perfectly in bringing all of the locations to life. But something else that I really wasn't a fan of, and this might seem like a nitpick, was the textures, or lack thereof. This is really one of the main things that separate the megastructure in NaissanceE from the one in Blam. When you look at Nihei's landscapes, they always seem made of metal and stone. They're rough, decadent, and uninviting. While in NaissanceE, I don't even know if there's a single texture at all in the whole game. Everything is flat, clean, sterile. You can only guess the materials you walk on by the color. And this is a stylistic choice like any other. You can personally like it or not. Me, I'm not a big fan, but it's also not a deal breaker. Though it does give the whole thing a different atmosphere when compared to the manga. It feels much less realistic, less grounded, and dare I say, less depressing and oppressive. There's a reason for which people will always mention NaissanceE when asked about Blam-related media. It still manages to capture the fundamentals of the setting. I feel like in no other game does that infinite concrete Killy jungle aspect of Blam shine better than here. It's the constant contrast between the maze of stairways and hallways connected almost randomly and leading nowhere, and the vistas on the rest of the structure which makes you feel completely insignificant, that gives you that characteristic mixture of unease and wonder that you find in Blam. So when it comes to the fundamental points I've mentioned before for something to scratch the blam itch for me, it gets that part right. It's also fun enough, and the traversal is alright most of the time, if a bit annoying, so there's that. But when it comes to story and the vastness of time, well, it's up for discussion. Seeing how minimalistic the narrative aspects of Naissance are, I think that the understanding of the game's story and setting relies heavily on personal interpretation. We are just thrown into this world without knowing where, when, and who we are. There are some clues for sure, but not enough to say this is what happens with any certainty. And so each individual player will either feel like the lore here is somewhat similar to Blam, or they'll feel like there's no real connection to it, and that the world of Naissance is completely different beyond the simple fact that it's set in a megastructure. Personally, I'm somewhere in the middle, but then again, just reading the manga might have influenced me into looking for things that aren't there, and I don't want to force an interpretation of the game based on other media. I think that Naissance is best experienced, again, on its own terms. And while it is inspired by Nihei's work and pays homage to it, the devs were creating their own piece of art that can stand on its own two legs. I also don't want to spoil the few big elements of the story, because you should play it through on your own. It's free on Steam, so you really have no excuse with this one. And so we come to my final recommendation, Lorn's Lure. And boy do I have a bone to pick with this game. Lorn's Lure is a 2024 game by Rubeki Games, and many people were very excited for it to come out, especially fans of Blam. In it you play as an android inside of a, say it with me, megastructure. And your objective is pretty much that of following this strange ghostly apparition through different settings. You have a whole bunch of different platforming mechanics beyond simple jumping. You can slide, ledge climb, wall jump, and you even have your trusty climbing picks. I'll say it outright, the game is equal parts fun, beautiful, engaging, and absolutely infuriating and disappointing. Let's take it from the top. You start out with a little cutscene in which the plot is established, and immediately this screams Blam so hard. Look at these shots, where our protagonist is but a tiny shape in a huge industrial environment. These seem directly lifted from the manga. And if you're anything like me, you're already 100% hooked. After a big ol' slide, the first level starts. You're stuck in cramped concrete passageways filled with metal pipes, and here you get acquainted with the basic platforming mechanics. It's also here that you get a first taste of how the lore of the game is dished out. At times you can find objects or structures that you can scan. These can be computer terminals, for example, which give you some information about whatever was happening in this specific part of the structure, like here. I forgot some equipment in the last base camp. I'm going back to get it. Daxa, if you're reading this and you've come back with Cresuo, I've left some food for you inside. I may need to synthesize more soon. Or our own character makes some remark about what we found. A safety hut. These are used by explorers that travel into the megastructure. They are built for extreme longevity, but this one is showing signs of wear and tear. Material analysis suggests that it was built 534 years ago. And so right from the get-go, we get both the personal stories of people or civilizations surviving in the megastructure, independently of our own story, and also the scale of time is established. I was drooling at this point. They had me hook, line, and sinker, and this is like 3 minutes in. What could possibly go wrong? We go forward some more, and then we finally come out into an open area. And just look at this.
It was perfect. Perfect.
Here we find the climbing picks and we're let loose. And I was enjoying myself like a toddler at this point. The environment is so cool, industrial, oppressing, but just open enough to give us that devastating sense of scale. Everything was going better than I hoped for. There's some super cool environmental details that just add to the lore, like this closed-off, inaccessible section that you can see through a glass window, which shows you a beautiful natural lush landscape, letting you know that there is still life in this place. Only you're cut off from it. The second level was pretty much more of the same, only with a color palette change. You also meet another character, a robot, and see that you're not the only one going around this place, because there's another character in this sort of hyperbaric chamber. They've been infected by some sort of fungus, and you'll need to get special flour to combat the infection. So you'll have to climb all the way down in creative ways to come back up and give it to the robot, who will in turn help you progress to the following stage. And here is where things start to become weird. The following level introduces a new mechanic, flares. Seeing as everything is dark here, you will need these to navigate. Alright, that's cool. They're also infinite, so you can just keep shooting them around. You get to an enormous slope which you'll have to ride down, and then You spend most of the stage stuck in cramped brown caves. That's it. This is very boring. It's all just the same texture all around you, and there's really nothing engaging happening here. Although there is a bunch of environmental elements that you can find, through which you piece together the story of another character who was exploring the caves before you. This I found pretty cool. And so I was thinking, alright, that wasn't great, but hey, they tried to do something different for this level. Let's see what else is in store. So you finish up this stage and you enter the new area. This gigantic stone water basin, filled with pillars and statues, and at first you're like, whoa, but soon enough you realize that this is a bunch of nothing. It's literally just this for the whole level. You have pretty much a boring-ass obstacle course made of the same textures and shapes. And I think that the developers themselves knew that this was just not very engaging, to the point that they put these little stone platforms that you can activate and that just float over the whole obstacle course. That's terrible. If you have to put basically an automatic skip on the platforming section in your platforming game, I'm sorry, but you messed up. To be fair to the game, I think that the next two chapters are definitely better. The fifth starts out quite similar to the first, which is great. If the whole game was like this, I would have probably loved it. The best part is that at one point you reach the Undercity, and here I was taken aback. You start seeing familiar architecture, and realize that this is an outpost on its last leg, inhabited by actual characters, and with its own interesting lore. And the music is so good here. It's this ambient track with some sad piano notes playing over it. It feels desolate, sad, and it's very reminiscent of the quiet moments from Blam. In the sixth stage we get a change of scenery which I actually enjoyed. We climb down more giant concrete walls and metal pipes to this desert-like area. And here again we get a lot of lore tidbits and we see remnants of a previous civilization and stuff. And it's overall not bad at all. Except the platforming parts with the wind mechanic. Like, actually shame on the developer for adding those because they're embarrassing. I hate them. And then we get to the 7th stage, and this was a deal breaker for me. I actually haven't finished the 8th and last level of the game because when I finished this one, I just dropped it. And all the reviews, even the positive ones, say that the 8th level was the horrible one, so I don't even want to try it because the 7th was enough for me. You arrive at the Sunken City, an old stone castle-like structure surrounded by darkness, and it's just awful. This is a bunch of nothing. It's once again the same damn texture everywhere, and you just have to climb up for like an hour on random nooks and platforms with literally nothing interesting happening except some lore tidbits here and there. But at that point I was already checked out. Just look at this. Does this seem like fun to you? And it's also so goddamn long. You can't convince me that this wasn't made with the sole intention to pad out the game. There is literally no effort here. Not in the design of the environment, and not in the making of an at least somewhat interesting climbing section. It's literally just jump up here, then jump up to the next one, then the next one, and then the next one. That's it. Like, I don't even know what to say about it because it's so mind-numbingly boring. You cannot sell a game like this for 15 bucks. This is just my speculation, but for me it feels like there's an amazing game comprised of only 4 levels here. The first 2, the 5th, and the 6th. I'm almost sure that this tower climb, the water basin, and perhaps even the cave were all added to pad out the game and make it longer so they could sell it for a higher price. It's either that or the developers just got completely lazy halfway through and stopped caring. Either way, I left Lorn's Lure feeling like I was scammed, honestly. And if you think I'm being too harsh, just go play it and see for yourself if it's worth 15 bucks in the state that it's in. I want to be clear, there is a beautiful game in here, and for that I want to give praise where praise is due. But that is exactly what makes all of those other sections doubly frustrating, because the difference is like day and night. I could say that even in the first level the route you have to take feels way too planned out. You don't really have much choice of traversal, because it's been preordained. But that's just a classic platformer thing, and when the mechanics are fun and the environment is so cool, it really doesn't bother me at all. But when you get to those stages where the environment is pretty much nothing and the mechanics stop being fun, you really start to notice it. You don't need to put any thought into how you traverse these stages, especially the 7th one. You just turn your brain off and keep jumping, and you don't even have anything cool to look at in the background. So in a lot of respects, Lorn's Lure is one of the closest things to a Blam game. It's got the vastness, the passage of time, the fun traversal, the style of the environments, the fragmented storytelling, everything. But the devs decide to just give up at a certain point for some reason. And you might say that I get such a negative impression because I'm constantly comparing it to the manga in my mind, but no, I'm comparing the bad stages to the rest of the game itself. It sets the player's expectations so high just to subvert them negatively. It's like if you were playing Devil May Cry and loving it, and suddenly halfway through the game they made you go back the same way you came from and beat the same bosses. Ooh, wait. So overall, would I recommend Lorn's Lure? Yes, but only if it's on sale. Negativity out of the way, I do hope to see more from the devs. If they made a sequel in which they fix all of these issues, it would be probably one of my and many others' favorite games ever. Because if you read the Steam reviews, many people are just as frustrated as me, saying that they started out having a great time, but that it all devolved into frustration later on. Or maybe I'm too harsh, I don't know. Perhaps someone else will play this and feel like 15 bucks is a perfectly reasonable price, and that those stages are fun and not as miserable or boring as I'm making them out to be. At the end of the day, this is all personal opinion anyway. And so these are my recommendations if you're a Blam fan and want something to fill that Blam-shaped hole in your heart. As you can see, all of those elements that I've cited at the start are pretty recurring in all of these titles. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, why is game X not on this list? Well, it's probably because personally they don't remind me that much of Blam. For example, many will probably think about Bleak Faith, but I don't know. I haven't actually played it, but from what I've seen, yeah, it does take some inspiration from Nihei, but at the same time it does its own thing. It has more of a ruined kind of vibe, you know? Then there's Signalis, which I think can't really communicate that scale which is so important to Blam, because of its isometric perspective and its small rooms. I've also seen Echo mentioned, but I don't know, it doesn't really give me Blam vibes. And as I've already said, I'm not including walking simulators, so there's also that. I wanted to talk about this manga for a while, and people noticed it in the background of my last video, so I said, heck, let's just do it. I know that I'm not breaking any new grounds here, and that a lot of people have already talked about Blam on YouTube, but you know, sometimes you just want to add your voice to the choir. For me, Blam is such a special and perfectly unique experience that I can't help but keep thinking about it. It's one of those pieces of art that can't really be imitated, because they contain such a recognizable blend of elements that give them their specific vibe, you know? You either copy so many of them that it becomes an imitation, or you just take some and your work will diverge greatly from the original. It's just lightning in a bottle. I don't know. You tell me how you feel about it. Thank you so much for watching. If you get nothing out of this video, I hope that at least you'll check out Metal Garden, because it's badass. I'll see you in the next one, and see you, space megastructures.